Earlier, I went into detail about the rocky land of New England. That whole area is so full of rocks, it cannot be made absolutely clear no matter how people try. There are always rocks or stones, or both, everywhere. So before manuring and fertilizing the soil, before the plowing and planting in the fields, we picked rocks. After every winter, it seems the stones came to the surface. My father would hitch up the horse to the lumber wagon, and field by field, we picked the surface rocks and threw them into the wagon to be taken to a spot, usually a muddy, wet, unused area in which nothing could be grown except perhaps brambles or wild bushes. There were a number of those areas, swamps we called them. Then the manure was spread all over the field. The plowing was done by a horse-drawn plow, a furrow at a time. My dad held the reins over his neck while holding the two handles, I'd call them, with his hands, steering the horse and making sure that each furrow overlapped the other. When the whole field was plowed thusly, he would then hitch the horse to a harrow. This machine had a roll of big discs, perhaps 16 inches in diameter, and a seat over it on which my father sat. This harrow chopped up the furrows so that the field was fairly smooth and planting could be begun, depending upon what was to be planted there. If it were corn, my father, had another implement to mark the rows. It was a horse-drawn marker with 4 or 6 posts, a seat over it for him to sit on as he went across the fields. First he went across the field one way, then across the field the other way, so that the markings were lined really like a tic-tac-toe game would be. Of course, we were small farmers, so we had no tractors. No one had a tractor then in our neighborhood. To plant the corn, the kernels were first tarred so that the crows wouldn't pick them up and eat them. These kernels were put into liquid tar and dried. There were enormous numbers of hungry crows ready to clean the field of seeds if they were not tarred. The planting device my father used had a container on it holding perhaps 2 quarts of seeds. It was attached to something similar to a walking stick or a cane, a tube-like pipe connected with an opening on the bottom. It let the seeds out when a little lever was pressed at the top. About 4, 5, maybe even 6 seeds came out at a time. My father walked the whole field, sticking this planter tip into each spot where the 2 lines crossed. These lines were about 30 inches apart in perfect squares. This kind of planting we did to raise corn for the chickens, etc. For the cows, corn was raised in straight lines and not crisscrossed. More plants were grown then and cut down to be chopped up, put into silos, salted, and used for fodder feed for the cattle. This corn was cut down while still green. The field corn, grown for seeds for the chickens, was allowed to dry in the field, and the cobs allowed to dry and be husked. When the time came to harvest this corn, we tied the bunch from one corner of the square with a bunch in the opposite corner. This became the holder for the stack. With a sickle, we cut the other stalks around at the ground level and stood them against the tied plants which were not cut. First on one side, then on the other for balance, until a large stack was standing upright. Then with another few tall corn plants, we tied the stack a foot or two from the top to prevent the wind from blowing it over, and also so that it would continue drying until husking time, which was usually in October. The fields looked so pretty, covered with corn stalks and yellow pumpkins all over. You see, pumpkin seeds were planted in between the rows of corn. These pumpkins were picked, stored, and later cut up and mixed with grain and fed to the cows. Husking time was fun, but tedious. It was tedious because there was so much to do. The stacks had to be cut down by cutting the two corn hills which held up the whole stack. Then the tie in the center was broken and the whole stack tipped over. You should have seen the mice that scampered away. The cats usually knew about them, and invariably a few of them followed us into the fields. We always had a bunch of cats. They lived in the barn as a rule. One person sat opposite the other by the fallen stack, and one by one pulled off the ear of corn and husked it. If we used only our fingers to shuck the ears, our hands could have been very sore. So, my father made each of us a little husker. It was a sharpened piece of stick about 4 or 5 inches long. Around it, he placed a leather ring in such a fashion that it fitted over our forefinger. The point would pierce the dry covering of the ear of corn and made it easier to pull off the husks. We did this job after school hours or on a Saturday. Oh, we husked bushels and bushels and bushels of corn this way. Then we put them into the grain shed, or sometimes some people had corn cribs, which was a little shed on tall legs of stone or iron or whatever to prevent mice from getting in the fall and winter. We had also a kernel stripping contrivance with which we stripped the ears of corn. This gadget was about 4 feet tall with a large hopper on top of it, similar to a meat grinder. We put the dry ears of corn into the hopper, turned the handle to make the gears turn. The ears of the corn, that is, the ears of the corn that we had husked, went between the gears and came out clean, the seeds going one way and the cob going another. The kernels we fed to the chickens, and so forth, and the cobs we burned in the home comfort. They made good heat. When my dad went more extensively into the dairy business, he had a silo built attached to the barn. As I've said before, for this silo, the corn was cut while still green and immediately chopped and blown into the silo. The day for silo filling was a great day for the kids. It was exciting, noisy, busy, full of commotion. Of course, we had to hire a man who owned the machinery for silo filling. There was an engine chugging away, a tall pipe leading to the opening of the silo, the cutters clipping and clipping while men kept feeding them. This chopped corn was blown in through the pipes into the silo. Wagons kept bringing fresh loads of corn from the fields. So many hands working at the same time made the day even more exciting. Now, someone had to be inside the silo to spread salt every so often. I suppose that was for preservation of the corn. And to spread the cut corn stalks. As the silo kept getting fuller and fuller, slides of the silo were placed, closing the opening, one by one, until the silo was full. Now inside the silo was another similar opening with a ladder for the inside worker to be able to get in or out of it. This led to the inside of the barn. After a day or so, the job was done. The silo was full and closed tightly, all ready for winter feed. Oh, the cows just relished this fodder during the winter.